Hello, friends. I think we are officially live now. We're going to be getting started pretty soon, but just want to give folks an opportunity to tune in, especially with Zoom. As I was just joking, Zoom sometimes likes to give us a little bit of keeping us on our toes. So we'll get everybody an opportunity to kind of get in and get settled. For those of you that are very prompt, feel free to post in the chat where you're tuning in from. Tell us if it's sunny where you are, maybe what you do, really anything that you want to share. We encourage you to use the chat today. So if you want to go as far as to tell us what you're looking forward to in this event, or what you hope to learn today, feel free. And we'll give it just another moment before we kick things off. Hello to all of you just joining. We're just giving it a couple minutes here before we officially get started. Nice. Looks like there's some blue skies. Today has been very moody on my side. We've had nothing but beautiful sun in Amsterdam for many, many days on a streak. And then today it was like erupting with thunderstorms, and now it's sunny again. So the nice thing about Dutch weather is that it blows over very fast because it's very windy here. So awesome.
I feel like growing up in the South, it's very much the same way. Like you could go out and it could be like cold in the morning, and then it gets really unbearably warm, and then it's like rainy, and then you never know where the day is going to end up. So you just have to layer.
Right, totally. I remember living in Florida for a moment, and there, that weather was like, it would shift quick, but it was also like dramatic at each interval. Like you'd have to pull over on the side of the street if it was like raining, because it was just torrential downpour. And if it was sunny, it was like, brilliantly sunny. So everything just had like a 10 on the Richter scale. So I guess that says something for Florida weather.
Yeah, Florida doesn't do it halfway. It's like either hurricane or nothing.
Yeah, nothing mild about Florida whatsoever. Amazing. All right, everybody, if you are just joining us, we're just giving everybody a few more moments to get in and get settled. As we've said, feel free to post up in the chat where you're tuning in from. Let us know if you're looking forward to anything specific in this event today. If you're hoping to learn anything specific, feel free to let us know. And we will kick it off. All right. All right, so welcome everybody to the Maze community. Thanks for joining another Maze Pathfinders event. This one is extra special as we're here in support of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I'm Ash Oliver, UX designer and design advocate at Maze, and I'll be your host and the moderator for our lovely panelists today on a discussion around designing for accessibility. Well, before we get too far, I want to run you through how we're going to spend this time together. So some quick housekeeping. For those of you that may be new to the Maze community, Pathfinder events are specifically designed to feature more intimate and casual discussions with industry peers. It's a great opportunity to ask questions, bounce ideas around, and of course, connect with others around shared interests and topics within the field. So we're super excited to be joined by these lovely panelists today. We're going to be spending the majority of our time together actually hearing from the panelists. And the prompts are going to cover a series of questions looking across the spectrum from initiating and researching to building and testing for accessibility. We've also got various points of view here across the different roles that are represented. So the other spectrum is going to kind of look across the maturity curve. So from getting started to maturing the practice and process of designing for accessibility. So this should serve you for wherever you are, whether role or on your journey to becoming more accessibility inclined and aware. So we'll spend the last 15 or 20 minutes taking questions from you all in the audience. You can post your questions in the chat at any time throughout this discussion, and I will serve them to the panel during the Q&A section. And then lastly, just to note, this event is being recorded, so you can find this recording along with all the past and future community event recordings inside Circle. And Circle is the Maze community gathering place, which is where we typically hold our virtual events. But I'm going to link it in the chat here so that you all have the link to where you can find this recording after the fact, and also, of course, check out future events as well. So now to introduce our lovely panelists, I'll have each person introduce themselves so that you have the context of how their work intersects with accessibility. So panelists, if you could please tell us who you are, where you're based, your pronouns, what company you work for, and maybe briefly share your either personal or professional connection to accessibility. And I know that's a mouthful, so I will in the chat post what that summary is, and take it away, maybe Elana.
For sure. So hi all, I'm Elana Chapman. I'm based out of Toronto, which is quite a gloomy day today. But my pronouns are she, her, and I am a UX researcher and accessibility specialist at Fable. I had a bit of a childhood experience that turned me towards sign language linguistics, which is how I got into the space at first before switching into UX research and design, which is where I sit now. Yes, trying to represent.
Amazing. I love that. All right, Kai, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Kai. I'm from Toronto as well, or Greater Toronto area rather, and I'm an accessibility analyst. I work with many different companies. So I've done some work for Fable, and currently I'm doing a lot of work with the National Network for Equitable Library Services, doing accessibility testing with apps and websites, tactile graphics and 3D printing research, and just exploring non-standard interfaces and thinking about how they work and optimal experiences and all that fun stuff.
That is very fun. That is a lot of fun stuff. That's exciting. Amazing. Soren, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my name is Soren Hamby. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am based out of Rockland County, New York, which is in the Hudson Valley, so New York City Metro. I work for Benjamin Moore and Co. We're a paint company and do a lot of manufacturing and color theory, color science, which is really fun for a designer. I am the senior manager of UX and digital design, and I also helped kick off our accessibility program, which our accessibility team is growing, which is very exciting. The personal connection that I have to accessibility is that I've had a chronic illness since I was, like preteen, and so I've had chronic illnesses since I was like 11, and then when I was moving to New York, about around the same time I started losing my vision, and that made like the move a little bit more urgent for me. And off and on, I've had like different levels of vision through my life, and that's when I really began to realize that things are dramatically different depending on your level of sight, how your life can end up and how you interact with the world, and how inaccessible a lot of people build things, even though we have like all these wonderful tools and AT built into the OS, assistive technology built into operating systems. So that's where I started to really get interested in like how I could be part of the change, and stepped into a lot more of accessibility roles and trying to be that bridge in between design and development.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that introduction. Apologies all for the screaming child that is outside, if you can hear that on my side. Yuri, over to you.
All right, thank you, Ash. Yeah, I'm Yuri. I'm a product designer at Typeform. So Typeform is an online form conversations platform. I've been working here for 3 years now. We are in Barcelona. I'm actually quite happy that today we are in the office. Some of us are in the office, which is nice to see people in real life. And as a product designer working on the respondent experience, so how you answer the Typeform, we started working on accessibility, making sure that anyone can answer a Typeform, that they have a good experience answering. So we started working and investing more on accessibility, and that's where I also started learning, and we started working on it with Fable, which is nice to have it here as well. So yeah, and we've been working now for maybe 1 or 2 years, and hopefully improving quite a lot.
Amazing. Thank you all. It's really incredible roster of panelists here. And like I said, great diversity across personal and professional connections, as well as their individualized roles and kind of how they've worked with accessibility in their career. So very happy to all have you, and excited to get into the discussion. So I'm going to serve up each prompt. It's more of an open-ended kind of either question or topic to get us started. I'll call on a panelist just to start, and then we can hear from others as they either have more to contribute or if they want to react to something that another panelist has said. So I think a good place to start, and we'll kind of progress as we get a little bit more in the weeds, but maybe a good place to start would be with just some context setting and some general definitions, defining some important key terms, especially if there are those of you in the audience that might be approaching or learning about these terms for the first time. So Elana, I thought you might be a good person to kick us off by defining a few key terms. And I have a few here that we might want to define, but I'm happy to have you also include some other terms if you think I've missed any, just to kick us off. So maybe just talk a little bit about your definition of like accessibility, and then we can kind of move on to maybe some acronyms that are common in this space.
Yeah, this one it's trickier than people think, because accessibility and usability go hand in hand. And so it's hard to kind of break those two apart a lot of times. So for me, when I approach accessibility, it definitely comes down to, can the information be usable and accessible to someone in the way that they prefer? So there's that aspect of not just being able to get to it, but being able to get through it in the way that you think of that matches your mental model. And so one thing that's really challenging is you get the question of, is this accessible? And it's not enough of a question. It's, is this accessible by keyboard? Is this accessible for someone who uses a screen reader? Because something that's accessible for someone who uses a screen reader is very different than something accessible for someone who relies on captions. And so having kind of specifics to what the accessible question is can help really flesh out the meaning of that word accessible, because it can be such an umbrella term otherwise.
Absolutely. That's a really great place to kick it off. And one of my questions was kind of the difference between usability and accessibility. So perhaps if you want to expand on that a little bit more, and if anyone wants to kind of jump in on that either.
Yeah, I'll kick it off, and then I'm excited to hear other people's for sure. And definitely kind of the Fable approach to it is definitely, there's the accessible in terms of something's compatible, meaning this website that we're going through, it's compatible with someone's assistive technology. And that's a different fine, because if the button doesn't work for one screen reader user, it's likely not going to work for any screen reader user. And so there's that aspect of, it's black and white, it's not going to be compatible. But then there's that like softer usability side of, okay, we can get to the button, but is the button in a findable way? Is it in a usable way? And so for me, the accessibility side is kind of a bit more compatibility technical, and it goes hand in hand with the more softer usability findings of, did we design this in a way that people expect? Did we design it in a way that people can anticipate and it gives enough feedback so you have confidence around that experience?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that and say that a lot of people, and what Elena is saying here is like there's subjective and objective issues. So an objective issue is something that, can be solved by code. So like, does the button have an ARIA label or not that announces it to a screen reader would be an example of an objective issue that could be solved with code. Like, you can detect yes or no, it's a binary issue, like does it have it, does it not, but you can't tell if that is accurate, like if the content is accurate. So that would be more of a subjective issue, like does the content make sense, is it understandable by people, is the font the right size, like things like that. That's where I think customization really steps in, and being able to dial into some of the tools that we have at our fingertips. One thing that a lot of people get hung up on is creating the universal design that works for everyone. But what's really, really popular right now in accessibility as a profession is saying, where can I make things ubiquitous, but where can I make things personalizable, and dial into some of these tools that we have, because everyone's device has all of these tools on it where people can personalize their experience and say, like, I want to see less motion, so I want to turn motion down. And that's like been really helpful for one of my team members that had a concussion and had like some cognitive disability essentially after that, because anytime that there would be a lot of motion on the site, she just like couldn't use it. So there's a lot of issues like that, but I think at its core, accessibility is about removing barriers for people to access information and be able to do tasks. And sometimes that means there's UI problems, either objective or subjective, but then we get into service design as well. So that's like the 201 talk, but that's where you start getting into more of like an organizational level, like are our ideas that we're creating formed around the idea of removing barriers to access.
Really, and like tremendous like add on there, and I think a great distinction too of what Elana was just describing. Just kind of going one step further with like key terms and kind of understanding some definitions, it brings into question the connection of accessibility and inclusive or universal design. So as you mentioned, that is a big topic, but we, especially for someone who may be less familiar with accessibility, it seems like perhaps these terms are used interchangeably, or, like one thing might mean the next. So maybe Kai, you could describe like what your take on like inclusive or universal design is, especially as you've worked with kind of various organizations across testing accessibility. I'm curious to your thoughts around inclusive and universal design, what that might mean.
Yeah, so just really to add on to what everyone else has said, accessibility, the way I see it, is having the foundational access to all the different components of a site and getting at the information, but usability is really the looking at the ideal experience for the user and what that might be like for efficiency and the ability to process information in a way that makes the most sense to them. And so definitely usability takes it a little bit further in that sense. But yeah, the universal aspect really, there are a lot of common characteristics that we look at that can really set a solid foundation for everyone. But it's the inclusive aspect, I think, that hones in on some of those characteristics and takes it to kind of that next step where it's a little bit more customizable.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And again, we could probably spend the whole talk talking about that. But I think, and in combination to this event, we recently recorded an interview with Samuel Prue, who is an accessibility advocate at Fable. And one of the things that I learned from that is very much being kind of defined by you all in this conversation is like accessibility and inclusive design extends far beyond just like disabilities. As Sam was talking to me, it became my awareness, kind of expanded when thinking about like, it's a situational disability to be approaching a door with your hands full of groceries, or, a situational type of experience where you might, experience an injury and be in the recovery period. Like these are all things that we kind of, may not live with an ongoing disability, but may encounter moments of being disabled or impaired in a certain way. So I think as we're, just kind of setting the stage here between accessibility and inclusiveness, I think expanding our horizons beyond just thinking about screen reader users, for example, and thinking about all of us that may be impaired in one form or another, or be losing our sight, or be aging in certain ways, I think is important context setting. So thank you all. Moving on, I think everyone here probably is a proponent or believes in the value of accessibility, but we likely have all encountered challenges inside organizations or teams where it may be that accessibility is like a checklist after the fact, or may not ever, kind of see its seat at the table, so to speak, because it may be perceived internally as like a huge endeavor, or, something that's going to take up a lot of resources, or may, unfortunately, the misconception may be that it will only serve a small subset of users. So I'm curious to hear from the panel on like what you think the biggest drivers are for like the value and benefits or ROI, so to speak, if folks here would be trying to internally champion or, kind of persuade internal stakeholders within their teams around why accessibility is important. So maybe Yuri, you might be a great person to start because you've led a project internally at Typeform in this direction. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and I think what you said before is exactly this. You shouldn't think of accessibility trying to improve the experience just for a subset of people. And as you said, a subset of people that probably have a permanent disability. This is not at all the case. As you said, this is much bigger. We always need to think about permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities. And whenever you improve the experience for one, you're going to improve the experience for all of them. So it's not only you trying to sell that, oh, we need to improve for this type of user, for this group. It's no, you just want to improve your experience itself. You want to make your whole experience better. And we've seen that it actually made our experience much better. Once we started fixing and improving how we use keyboard navigation, we saw a big drive on our forms completion with keyboard. And we know that from the size of the improvement, from how much improvement we had, it is not only people that have permanent disabilities that were using these. Like it were many other people that started using these because they felt much easier, because they also wanted to use just the keyboard to improve these. So we started seeing value quite fast on improving these, on improving accessibility on our forms. And I think these helped it to start showing the value that we needed to show to make people really understand and care about it. Not only these, I think also having the tests and talking directly with people that have permanent disabilities, this for sure was a big change for us, because you started creating empathy and understanding what were their difficulties and how we could improve their experience as well, besides the experience of many others.
Yeah, and that's a good segue, because I have some questions about like building empathy and the actual like implementation and researching with users. Before I get there, I want to hear maybe from Soren on the same question, because being a manager, I assume that you might be inside these conversations or interactions with stakeholders, perhaps around why initiate or spend resources on accessibility, and perhaps the connotation that it's seen like a project or a checklist. So can you kind of speak to some of your experience in bringing awareness to accessibility and its importance?
Yes, and actually I've worked with a lot of organizations over the past couple of years that are very new to accessibility, that have low awareness and low skill level in the area. So it's always a unique challenge to say like, how do we even get started? How do we get buy-in? And I think that's the big question, right? Because you can try to say like, I'm going to include it in my work all you want, but organizationally you have to have buy-in. And when we think about like diversity, equity, inclusion as well, like those kinds of initiatives need buy-in from, VP and higher kind of level, because otherwise they're not very successful if people aren't really invested in them. So I would say that it's really good to understand the different models of why people in a business position might want to do that. And it goes back to kind of that like designers are starting to become like business thinkers as well, and think about like these. And I hate the model of like compliance because it often like is at odds with inclusion. But like somebody might be interested in accessibility because of the compliance issues that it brings up with like the ACA, which is Canada's version of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. So, you have like, okay, well, we're in two different countries internationally that both have really similar laws. Like it only makes sense for us to continue on this accessibility journey because we're operating in these two countries that we could, be sued in. There's always the right thing to do if like the company values espouse inclusion and community, then you can always like speak to stakeholders that hold those values very tightly in that sort of way. And then also you're always like bringing more people into your market share. There's a survey that I shared for our resources bank that says that 34% of people in the US population of working age have a disability. And that kind of like blew my mind that was from 2019, which that's such a large number. Like we toss around like that 18 to 20% number a lot of times, saying like, oh, a fifth of the people that you're trying to reach have a disability, and that's large. But when we think about like working age people from 18 to 64, that is really large, 34%. And so you can always make the argument that like by excluding that large of a segment, you're really, excluding a lot of people that might use your product or service. So I think you have to really learn those different models, and there's a couple more, but those are really good places to start with, like speaking to values. So it does take a little bit of like detective work to find out like what other kind of decisions has this person made recently, like what kind of values do they have. But that's where I usually try to start is to find out what's important to them, and then to kind of shop that around to them and work it into the presentations and things that I give when talking about the return on investment.
Amazing distillation of that. That's really great. I mean, and I was thinking as you're saying that, like if we're just perhaps speaking to stakeholder that is maybe a little bit more business oriented and is taking less of the kind of inclusiveness mindset and more of the like hard and fast return on investment, as you said, that's a missed opportunity in kind of that market share type of adoption within the product, because you're just kind of missing that whole segment of people. And I think there was a recent study that analyzed, it was this year, I think it was like WebAIM, analyzed like 1 million home pages for accessibility issues and found that like 96% had at least one guideline issue. And so, I mean, like I think maybe one of the factors that's difficult there is that it seems like this enormous task, that there's just like so much to do, and that, most of the web isn't accessible already. So it's maybe easier for organizations to kind of, skirt the need to prioritize this. So kind of coming off the back of that, I'm thinking, Elana, like, what are some of the practical ways that you, maybe from like the research and like evangelizing side, getting started side, like what are some tactical ways that that teams can start to approach accessibility?
Yeah, really echoing Soren on the aspect of find out what's important to your stakeholders. That's a lot of any researcher in the room will probably have experienced the same kind of experience of people deprioritizing user research in general. And now you have like the same thing with accessibility in spaces. And so one thing I find that's really important, especially if you're starting accessibility as like a grassroots initiative in your company and trying to get that buy-in, is still having accountability within your team. So setting goals, setting kind of OKRs that you want to achieve, because then it makes it easy to kind of communicate of accessibility is not so scary. Here's how we're breaking it down. We knew for these experiences, we had these completion rates. We got some devs to fix some things. Now our completion rates are here. And so if you start to show things can be kind of measured, especially if you have stakeholders that really care about numbers long-term, that can be one way that helps kind of smaller teams of like setting up someone's accountable for this work, because it can start to slip and you can also get demotivated if kind of you have no one kind of checking in and kind of seeing how that work's going long term. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing is trying to bring people into your process, especially for researchers, getting people to ride along in your interviews. It's one of the most impactful things I've found for, especially if you get your dev team to sit in. And if they get to ask questions, it brings them into the process. And it also makes you realize this code that I wrote, it impacts someone. And now I have a face, an image, an experience that someone had. I can think of when I'm writing future code of, oh, I know this didn't work last time. Now I know, and I can also start spread the word. And so you kind of have that effect where the more people you touch, the more they can also spread the word and grow in the organization. That's kind of the bottom up approach. It's great when you can get that executive leadership that's like gung ho and brings it from the top, but you can also feel empowered from whatever position you're currently in to start spreading and doing it that way as well.
I love that. Yeah, groundswell from the bottom. You know, just being able to kind of survey and use your investigative skills to be able to kind of plot out what's the right approach based on the kind of environment that you work in. So I love these perspectives. Kai, I'm interested to hear from you. So we just kind of segued a little bit into this topic where it's like actually researching and testing with users that experience either disabilities or utilize assistive technology. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit of your perspective of the work that you do and maybe why it's important for teams to be testing directly with people and disabled users.
Yeah, I think it's really important to test with users with disabilities because we can turn on screen readers and, especially with a lot of assistive technology that's built in now, it's very easy to do that, to be able to check if a button reads and all that stuff. But with disabled users, there's always different strategies, workflows, and skills that they'll bring to the table. And I think it's really helpful to see everything kind of fitting together, seeing how they browse the site or the app and looking at all the different techniques that they use, which if you're not a native assistive technology user, it's kind of hard to capture those. And I know for me, kind of one of the reasons why I got into accessibility was because as a native screen reader user, since I'm totally blind, I kept seeing accessibility breaking. Sometimes companies who were aware of accessibility, they would be able to implement certain things. It would work all right for a while, and then an update would break it. So I think that speaks a little bit to kind kind of this philosophy of accessibility, not just as a checklist, something to just get done, but really as an integrated approach, as a system where you can iteratively continue to improve and develop accessibility, and making sure that it still works well no matter what new features or updates are in. And I see a lot of people when I introduce the idea of accessibility, they're very daunted by the whole thing, thinking that, you know, it's very difficult, expensive, and you know, they think that consumers are expecting accessibility the very next day. But you know, obviously that's not practical, and that's really not true. You know, I think, speaking from personal experience as part of the blind community, and even you know, larger in the disability community, I think as long as there is a true commitment and we're seeing improvements that really help us access products, I think that's something that really makes us happy, because there's many different approaches to accessibility, but I think one of the foundational key ingredients is really that commitment, and following through with that commitment.
Absolutely, so well said. And I think is, you know, if you're thinking about this like integrative approach, I think that's the mindset shift that really needs to take place, because of course, you know, something as large as accessibility and potentially complex, given your potential product or environment, a checklist is going to seem daunting because it's really long potentially. And instead incorporating this from more of that integrative approach really ensures that this is something that's more of a process that's ongoing. But it's something that really inspired me based off of what you just said, Kai, was as a designer, I really like am giddy and excited about the opportunities within constraints. And so maybe there's also a reframing there for people to think about, because I think it's often on the opposite, where we think that, well, if we go through with an accessibility you know, minded approach, that, you know, design has to suffer for some reason. And, you know, like some of the things that blew my mind was like SMS and dark mode. Those were two accessibility things that were built that now we all get to benefit from. So I think just keeping it inside of that that perspective opens a lot more opportunities. So yeah, appreciate you making mention of that. Yuri, just to kind of round off that topic of, you know, kind of ways that we can actually approach this as a team, what were some of the things that you went through at Typeform, whether it was in the beginning or, you know, kind of in the middle of the project? Like, give me the like setting and environment, like what did this look like from a practical standpoint? Was there like a core team that worked on this within Typeform? How did you approach accessibility there?
Yeah, I think it goes to a point that Soren said about compliance. Like when we started mostly thinking about compliance, and I don't think this is bad, because this gave us a start, and the start made us understand a bit more, and from then we were able to start improving slowly, which we are still improving. So at Typeform we did have one team. It was not one team only focused on accessibility. It was already a product team that was working on this experience. So it had already experience with what we were working on. And then because we started with compliance, we started with what I believe is accessibility. Making accessible is like filling the WCAG, the web accessibility guidelines requirements. So we went one by one, and we understood what was wrong, what was not working, and we started improving these. After we started improving these, we started understanding better the environment, understanding better what we were doing, and we understood that it was not only about requirements, which then started shifting our focus for not only being compliant, but actually having good usability. And as we said before, usability is just usability as we have in our product, any product. You can build a flow or an experience that has good usability or that has bad usability. You might be able to achieve achieve your goal in an easy way or in a hard way. When we're talking about accessibility, is the same thing. You can achieve the requirement in an easy way or in a hard way. So now we are shifting this focus for achieving in an easy way. It takes a while. I don't think we should, and to what Ka said, is we shouldn't worry about making mistakes or not understanding and making it right the first time. It's a learning, we are learning, but it's about showing the progress. So we started with the requirements, we made mistakes after the first requirements that we thought we improved, we hadn't improved yet. Then we understood that it was about understanding how to have good usability. So we started actually with Fable to interview users. And once we started interviewing users, I think it was when it changed everything, not only for our team, but also for the company, because we are able to share all the interviews and share all the findings inside the company. And it's when we started getting empathy. And it was when we started showing the difficulties or the different situations, or exactly what we said about the permanent and the situational. I remember on a presentation on the design team that we shared one user that we interviewed that he used his lips and his nose to interact with the screen. And it was when one designer said, yes, like on the code, when I have gloves on, I usually use my nose also to interact with the screen. So it's like you made the experience better for everyone once you made it easier to interact with your nose. So it's when you expand these. So it's when you make people have more empathy and it started growing. So yeah, we went from one team having the learnings. I think it was also understanding the business, as we said, understanding the processes inside Typeform, understanding the engineering processes. How do we build these? And we being able to fit accessibility into these so that this is not an afterthought, it's inside the process. And with these learnings, we are now starting to expand to different teams. So now there are a few other teams that are also working and building the experience that needs to be accessible from the beginning. We still have to expand to many more teams, to many more experience inside Typeform. But it was with one team, and the knowledge that we got, we expanded to another team. And yeah, with these interviews, we understood better. We were able to improve a bit. The product still had more issues, then improve again. It's as a normal product. You improve a bit, you do more tests, you discover more issues. You improve these issues and your maturity grows. So maybe in the beginning, your issues were people couldn't use at all. Now your issues is, I would prefer to use this way instead of that way. So it's just improving the maturity itself on the team.
Yeah, I love that that story, because it shows, kind of your entry point into accessibility and how, the WCAG guidelines, for example, even if taking more of that compliance perspective, at least can get kind of the team oriented with a place to start and get then more and more immersed into the process, as you described. Kind of building that from, just as you represent the more respondent side of that accessibility, and then kind of branching that out across other teams. So I think it's a great example of, how a real, company is incorporating this and what their approach was to getting started. Before we turn it over to audience questions, I thought maybe we could have each of you share maybe something that has surprised you in your accessibility awareness journey, or maybe a key thing that you would want to impart with the audience here. So I can start with you, Soren, if you want to maybe share something that's surprised you, or a key thing that you would like to share with the audience.
Yeah, I think the key thing that I want to share is just how important representation is. I feel like there's a lot of folks that the only interaction or representation they've seen of people with disabilities and technology is maybe like a very exploitative kind of inspiration story of someone, like hiking Mount Everest with prosthetics and a mobility device, or like somebody that got one of those cool running cameras, so they were able to continue doing 5Ks while they have retinal detachments, and so those kinds of things are a little bit misleading for people because they are very much the extremes of people. They're athletes that would be like Olympic athletes, but it's not your everyday person, and a lot of times people don't like see that representation of people just like going about their lives using assistive technology to get by. And that's one of the things that I get asked a lot is just like, well, if you have a visual disability, like how do you even work as a designer? Like how do you approve people's work? And that's I think one reason why I'm so open about the fact that I have disabilities, that I'm neurodivergent, that like I feel like people need that representation and they need that voice on their team saying like, hey, like we're here, we're everywhere, and like this is you need to know how we operate as people to kind of like understand where we're coming from and to take this feedback.
Huge. Yes, representation is major, and I appreciate you being here and sharing that. That's part of that entire thing. So thank you for that. Elana, do you want to share either something that surprised you or kind of your key takeaway that you would like to impart with the audience?
Yeah, I was trying to decide between two. I think I'll go with echoing off some things from Yuri in that every step you take is a step, and it can be really challenging getting into accessibility at the start because it feels like there's so much to do. And so the more you break it down and you celebrate your small wins and your growth in that path, it's going to motivate your team to do more and more as you go on. And you'll see kind of that shift from, okay, can people even just do it, to how do we make this a fantastic experience? And so making sure that you don't think of accessibility and inclusion as a project. It's about a journey for your team, and that you're doing it long-term and you're building the muscle to support it long-term and flex that muscle in everything you do.
Love that. Yeah, absolutely. Kai, anything that has surprised you in your own personal experience with accessibility, or something that you would like to impart with the audience here as a key takeaway?
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me was really the many different approaches that you can take with accessibility. And so I started out as just any other user, as a screen reader user, and then I got into more of the professional side of things, looking at WCAG and all that type of stuff. And at first I was like, yeah, it's, WCAG, and as long as they follow WCAG, then, the experience is good enough to be able to be accessible. And in the blind community, there's kind of that expectation that as long as we can access the information, then we're done, because information, is scarce in certain areas. And so, one of the struggles even now is really just simple access to information. We're not talking about experiences or the optimal ideal experience, just access to information. But that really has shifted as I continue to work with different companies and looking at some of the research things that I've been doing. And now I think it's really important to not only think about WCAG. WCAG is important, but it's a starting point. It's kind of a jumping off point. But when you have that foundation, it's also important to include users with disabilities to test, and to be able to look at the inclusion and usability aspect, because to me, I think it's not only important that we're able to access information, but it's important that our experiences are equitable. And so in a concrete example, we could be looking at a web page where all your links and buttons and all the different controls work as expected. The user can operate all that and it's WCAG compliant. But what if there are visual diagrams and images, and we can add image descriptions, textual image descriptions, and that will support and satisfy WCAG. But that might not be an optimal experience for a blind screen reader user who thinks in a very visual and spatial way. And so one of the tools that I like to share with teams when they try to tackle more complex visual images and making them non-visually accessible is the technique of sonification, where you can images into audio. So with something like a chart or a graph, you can use a sine wave to show the shape of a curve if we're talking about a line graph, or using different notes to be able to show the heights of different bars in a bar graph. And so something like this goes beyond WCAG and really shows you that there's different experiences and people process information differently, and to be able to provide both textual descriptions and sonification really takes the user experience to the next level.
Amazing. And that's very inspirational as I think about, even the things we were just saying in the very beginning, like testing within using 3D printers and things. Like there's so much on the horizon if, designers apply their skills and expertise in this direction, from taking accessibility to being good enough, as you described, to something that's actually inventive or a much more optimal experience. So that's very inspiring to hear. Yuri, I'll close it out with you before we get to the audience questions. Anything that has surprised you in your accessibility journey, or any kind of key learning you want to share with the audience?
I think I have two key learnings. I will try to be super fast on that to be able to speak both. But the first one was really changing your mindset of accessibility being just a feature that you might think after that, but actually being the part of the foundation of what you're building. I think we need to understand that making the experience accessible is the same thing as making it work in different devices, working in different sizes, having different, to think about the error state, a loading state, and all these different ways that your product might work. So think about, if you don't do these, if you just design for one screen and on the other breaks, your experience is broken. If you only work for, you don't think about loading states, about error state, your experience is broken. So not thinking about how users will use in different assistive technology, your experience is broken as well. So don't take these as something that, oh, it comes later. After we finish, we do. No, it needs to be from the beginning. And the other one is, don't be afraid to start wrong. To start wrong means that you already started, and most probably people will see that it's wrong, and then you might be able to start talking about how to make it right. So, but at least you already left the point zero where there was nothing. You already have something that people can talk about, something that you can discuss, and probably someone that will tell you that that is wrong is someone that you can pair with, so to start making it right. So really don't be afraid. All of us probably started from a wrong point, from a wrong experience now, but you start learning. And I'm not saying also that we are on the right point. We probably are still on the wrong point, but we are learning, we are improving. So just don't be afraid to take this step from zero to the first wrong step.
That's really great advice. Just as, some research is better than no research, some accessibility is better than no accessibility. So I think that's a great place to end that, I'm gonna move through some of the audience questions. A couple of these I'll just kind of knock out quick, and then I will serve them up to a particular audience members or sorry, panelist member, especially where the audience member has called the question specifically to one of you. The first quick question that I'll knock out is, how do you find participants with disabilities for research or interviews, accessibility testing? If any of the panelists want to drop into the chat, and actually we're going to share some resources in the Maze community after this event, so there will be more. But I think the big highlight one is, of course, Fable, as we have two representatives here that have either worked for Fable in the past or currently do. So Fable is a great organization. As I mentioned, we did an episode with the podcast with a design advocate or accessibility advocate at Fable. So I think that's a great resource. And while I'm going to the next question, either Elana, Soren, Yuri, Kai, if you have any other organizations that you might use to reach those participants.
This isn't so much an organization as it is a tactic on some of your current ways of recruiting. A lot of people feel very uncomfortable asking, like, do you have a disability? Or they feel like there might be some like legal issues with doing that. I'm not sure that there is, but again, I'm not a legal expert. Please don't take my advice as legal advice. But asking if somebody is an assistive technology user specifically, like, do you use one of the following assistive technologies, is a really great way to recruit participants that use one of those assistive technologies, because really what kind of disability they have, or if they consider themselves to have a disability, is neither here nor there if they use that assistive technology on a weekly, daily basis. I would say also it takes into consideration that some people use assistive technology on a temporary basis. Like for me, my vision has changed over the course of a couple of years. Like there were some times where I was a full-time screen reader user, and now I'm only a part-time screen reader user. So it's very different. And I would say that that is one of the best ways to go about it. And it really causes us to have to put on that research sort of idea of like, really, what are we trying to get at? Does it work with this assistive technology so that you can access it? It's not really so much, wanting to test for that. But if we are wanting to ask specifically, does this work for somebody that, is autistic? Then you do want to ask, because you do want to say, like, I'm looking to recruit participants because I want to see if like this content works for people with autism. Or so it really depends on what you're trying to test. If you're just trying to see if the UI works, go with asking about assistive technology.
That's a great tactic, because I think as you just said, yeah, there's an approach thing here where you may feel uncomfortable, but 100% it's reframing the question to be more specific around what you're looking for. Coming off of that, there's a question here. Apologies if I mispronounce your name. I believe it's Bedad. Bedad asks, does usability have a universal metric that considers all aspects of usability or accessibility? There's a usability gap for those with autism who use the digital product, and I guess that is due to the absence of maybe metrics for all aspects of usability. So he's asking if there's like one universal metric to consider for all accessibility. I'll let any of the panelists speak to that if you want to.
Well, I would say that there's not really a universal metric even for like UX design or accessibility. But I would say that your market also really varies. So you may have a really specialized product. And so if you have a really specialized product, then you may need to test for specific things. And that's where it gets into, again, like, what exactly are you trying to find out with either testing or research, or what exactly are you trying to build? Who's your target? And then you can kind of dial down a little bit more into who's included in that group.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful, and I think important to keep in mind as we look at guidelines and compliance and all of the acronyms, but like distilling it back to like the importance and where that approach is coming from, I think is a good path forward. This time flew by. I'm sorry, y'all, that we couldn't get to everybody's questions. As I mentioned, though, we will be sharing a resource list. We're going to compile some of the favorite resources, links, things that you can kind of use as your learning roadmap as you move forward in accessibility. So I'll be pulling together some of the favorite resources and links from the panelists, as well as Maze and myself. And we'll be sharing that back in the Maze community along with the recording from today's event. Again, if you haven't checked out the most recent episode of the podcast, we just published on accessibility. So we'd love for you to check that out. Tell us what you think. I'm going to drop the Maze link in the chat here for those of you. It'll also be featured in the follow-up email. This is just to get your feedback on today's event, and would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much again for the panelists. I know we had to have Elana drop off 5 minutes early to go to another Global Accessibility Awareness Day event. So there were likely others cropping up online, but thank you very much for taking the opportunity to spend some time with us today and to hear from the panelists. So we really appreciate everybody's engagement today, and hope you all have a great rest of your week. We will be sharing other resources soon in the Maze community. So excited to take the discussion there. Thanks so much, Kai. Thanks, Soren. Thanks, Yuri. And
thank you so much.
Virtual thank you to Elana as well.
Really nice to talk to all of you.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.